Well, hello, here we are again. It is time for a new week. And I will tell you, this is a topic that my phone was blowing up all weekend. I was watching all the different posts come in. Um, Sports audio really brings together a very unique culmination of people. It's a skill set that if you've ever heard the inside of a sports truck during a game, if you don't like cacophonous settings, if you actually believe you need to only hear one thing as you're mixing, it is probably not the proper place to be sitting for you. If you just want to focus on one thing, and that's the magic of what our guests today really do. They focus on um, many things simultaneously, all towards one end, and that is delivering a premier audio experience for the viewers of a given sports event. So today I'll do some quick introductions here first, and then we'll kind of talk about our format as people are joining us. We've already got about 100 folks logged in, so we're going to let them keep coming in. Joining me today, kind of as a guest moderator, is Michael Mason from CP Communications. Michael was kind enough to help me pull together this great panel of our industry's top sports mixers. And I appreciate that, Michael. You know, CP and I have a very long history. You guys, your RF solutions, your equipment. We did a thing around Unity Intercom and the replacement of two-way radios for the New York Marathon. There's the industry is so broad now, so many opportunities that you know, CP is probably behind most broadcasts that you see if they're renting a microphone or IFB or wireless cameras or some special device that none of us know about yet because it won't be released until next year or something like that. You are the voice behind that. So thanks, Michael, for helping to pull all this together and for being a great company supporting us all out in the field with excellent support and great hardware.
Thank you. Appreciate the kind
Yeah.
words. Looking forward to hearing these three gentlemen talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody who's on, before I start the introductions here, for our listeners, go into the questions and answer portion of the control panel with your GoToWebinar, whether you're on an iPad or phone or your laptop, and you can start submitting questions in there. We'll be going through those later on, and where we can, we'll drop those in where they're appropriate, and we'll do our best to keep those questions moving and along. I think to really get going, let me just kind of walk around the screen real quick and just do a quick introduction and just briefly, you know, most of these folks, if you've not heard their name, you've heard their work. It's just, that's the nature of the business. Fred is probably Fox Sports, NFL, Super Bowl, too many to count, like everybody on this screen, of projects you've worked on. But again, one of the more recognizable events would be the Super Bowl and the complexity that goes along with that. We're going to talk about that. Anytime we talk sports, I think network sports, we are talking complexity, and big, you know, events only create more of that. Dave, he's from Chicago like me, so I'm gonna give him a quick shout out. That's not, no disrespect to anybody else, but you know, we're in Chicago and we got to take care of each other. That's what I'm saying, though. That's right. But Dave kind of is Masters, right? So golf, the quietest sport on the planet. So how many mics do you really need to do the quietest sport on the planet? Well, I think we'll find out later. There's actually quite a bit to making quiet sound really good on TV. And basketball. Obviously, I've been watching the the Michael Jordan special. And, you know, from Chicago, we understand, you know, 6 years, we're really good. Well, we were, but those days are gone. But Dave, that, you know, basketball is another one of those sports that has so many sonic components to it. I think it's going to be really interesting to talk about how you've applied this technology. And then Scott, Monday Night Football, and numerous other sporting events. The idea of drawing people into a game that is so incredibly physical, yet we're experiencing it, you know, on all kinds of devices, ranging from an iPhone all the way up to a full, you know, 7.1 surround in someone's home, or feature films. Lot to think about there, and building, and then the speed at which sports operates. Sports is unique in very much the way, unlike any other component of live event, because it tends to have the most compact load-in schedules. Obviously, the bigger events have some of the longest load-in schedules. You know, you think about a Super Bowl, or you think about Olympics, there we're at those far ends of the spectrum, right? But coming up in the industry, I'm sure many of you remember the 4-hour call, up, ready to go, get on the air, right? And so much of that, I'm interested to find out how that has driven your workflow. So that said, we've got a pretty good audience. We got 130 people logged in right now. I'm gonna start with our first topic that kind of brings us all here together right now, and that is around knowledge sharing, right? Experience sharing, and the importance of being able to, not, you know, whether it's with people you work with, coworkers, but also that generation coming in to the industry, right? What and how do you share the experience you had, and how you got here? So that said, I'm gonna start, and what we'll do is, I've kind of laid it out alphabetically, so we'll just go, you know, Fred, Dave, Scott on these answers, and feel free, guys, to interact. We were talking just before we began the webinar about who was most influential on you, and how is that translated? So Fred, why don't we start with you, and Michael, feel free to chime in with any questions.
Fantastic. First of all, thanks for having me here today, and Scott and Dave. These things are always kind of fun to do. But my career started, actually my network career started at CBS. I was fortunate enough to have their senior audio mixer and their designer, Bob Siderman, as my mentor. Bob was very kind. He took me under his wing early, and I think that's important. I think we all need to have a mentor, and at some point in time, which we'll talk about later, I think it's time for us to start giving back. And education, as you well know, has become a very, very important part of what I do and who I am, and I'm a big proponent of that. You know, it's time for me in my career to give back. Somebody gave to me early on and helped me, you know, have a nice career. So, you know, I would say between Bob and Mike Ricosa, who was a tech manager at CBS, actually, he's the one that really kind of helped me into the network side of that. There was a local show that I was doing in Salt Lake City, and Mike was there, and I met him and saw potential, and so he kind of took me under his wing as well. So that's kind of where I started my network career, was from Bob and Mike. But yeah, I would say Bob definitely has been the biggest influence on my career.
Fred, how was the first opportunity given to you from Bob to kind of push you into the big chair?
Probably Daytona in the late 80s. I had been freelancing for CBS doing some NCAA basketball games. And I was a field A2 for Bob in Daytona. And when he needed a break, he would have me start coming in and sitting in the chair on a couple of, you know, some of the lesser shows. Now, back then, you know, pretty much you had a Thursday show, a Saturday show, and a Sunday show. Now at Daytona, you've got like 15 shows going on in 2 weeks, and those guys get extremely busy with all the shows on, you know, on the sports nets and on the networks. there. So, you know, Bob, once I got to meet Bob, it was really nice that he started to bring me in and let me sit in the chair. That's before we had sub mixers. So we were doing the effects mix and the main mix out of MU12, which if any of you know MU12, it had a 48 channel Ward Beck console in it, and would hang a couple of Studer consoles on the wall for our tape playbacks. And it was actually pretty convoluted how we got stuff in and out of that truck. So then when we decided to go to a submix scenario, I started submixing for Bob, and then just kind of took off from there and started doing my own shows, some of the bigger shows, starting with NFL as the beat crew at CBS in the late 80s, early 90s.
Nice.
And how about you, Dave? How did you find yourself finally sitting behind the console? Was that something you just started out with initially as your goal and ambition?
Well, similar on the network side, similar to Fred, CBS was my initial network endeavor. But unlike Fred, he had Bob Siderman, who was the senior East Coast mixer. I had Mark Radulovich, who was CBS's West Coast mixer. And I had much tutelage under Mark in the early days in the 80s. And in terms of the network, he was very influential in getting me up to speed in terms to what to expect in terms of the network level. So I owe gratitude to Mark. But locally, it was trial by fire, essentially, at WGN, covering the Cubs and the Bulls. And I was a vacation relief part-timer, and it was one of those situations where someone didn't show up, and they're like, hey, kid, you know audio? Go do it. And so there was a lot of trial by fire.
Absolutely. And Scott, how would you say you entered, the industry, and who played that pivotal role for you, or roles?
Well, the way I entered the industry was kind of backwards. I A1 before I A2'd. I can remember showing up it was actually for BET, SWAC college football. And the director said, I need an IFB over here and an RTS over there. And I said, yes, sir. And then looked at someone and said, what is an RTS and what is an IFB? So anyway, but fast forward, and I had the good fortune of working with Bob Dixon. And Bob taught me a lot in the early days. I was working with him on ESPN used to do these events called Sports Festival, Olympic Festival. And I was able to work with Bob extensively there as an A2, and he really taught me how to properly A2, which led me to learn how to more properly A1. And then later on, Ron Scalise was a big influence and got me involved on the ESPN side with what was Sunday Night Football. I was filling in for him, and then when he added a submix to Sunday Night Football, I became his submixer. And then when Ronnie decided to step back, I took the A1 role from Ronnie on Sunday Night Football, which turned into Monday Night Football.
Yeah, so I think we see a lot of similarities there with that importance of, everyone has someone whether that's a mentor, whether that's a coworker, and in the case of, the submixer role, that really was that final step, right, for everybody in some cases for these events, and in other cases, it was simply being thrust into a position and being prepared to do that. We were talking about that stress of a truck, right? That an environment, it's unique to television production. Every phase of production has its own level of stress. Television production, I think, is different level of stress, mainly because as an audio mixer, if you're in a theater, you're used to that quiet environment. Perhaps if you're a film mixer, You're used to also having more control of the environment around you. So when you're focusing, television, not so much, right? You aren't given that necessarily that opportunity. I think what I would say is, where did you find, Fred, when you're thinking about mixing, what would you say from a workflow standpoint? Is it just muscle memory and you just get used to doing things a certain way and that's that? You know, if we go to that picture of the patch window at the Super Bowl, you appeared to really try to use every single fader on your console. So how do you approach something when you're, you know, if you're thinking about talking to that next generation of audio mixer? What are some key things you're trying to convey?
I think first of all, I was probably more hard-headed when I was younger. You know, now I'm probably a little more relaxed with that stuff. I know that's hard to believe for some of you listening, but you know, now it's pretty much muscle memory. I am open to new things now, probably more so than before. I think a lot of us are that way. You know, we got set in our ways early in our career, and we do things certain ways, and things work for me. Something that works for me may not work for Dave or for Scott, and vice versa. You know, the way that we have our own workflows. But you know, the biggest key for me is to walk in with somewhat of a plan. I pretty much know what every stadium in this country sounds like. Pretty much know what every racetrack in this country sounds like. I've been to all of them several times. But to come in with a basic plan, knowing that there's going to be change occurring. When we went into the Super Bowl, I would say I was probably 80% prepared for that. Once we got there and changes were made, I would say that probably dropped to 40%. And you know, you just have to be flexible on site, and you know, just know that you're going to have some things that you're going to have to roll with. You know, and they're going to have to be compromises made and changes made. And I've learned over my career that compromise is key in what happens on a sporting event, because it's not all about us. I mean, there are so many elements involved with a sports production and productions in general. But I think to come in with a plan, I always sit down and try to walk in with paperwork for a basic framework of what we're doing. I think that's the same for all of us. We have a basic framework of what we're going to do, and once we get there, you know, like I said, adapt to some of the challenges that are presented for us. A lot of times we get paid to prepare for that show. A lot of times we don't get paid to be prepared for that. I think for me, I'm willing to give some time, and I was willing to give some time on my own to get where I need to be by preparing and walking in with, like at my Super Bowls, I walk in and give every one of my A2, I create a little book for them, and that's our plan. And then knowing that they're the ones out in the field, I'm not going to tell them what to do. I'll tell them what I need and what I expect, but I let them do it their way, because if they have to troubleshoot it and they have to think about how I've asked them to set that up, they have to stop for a moment and pause and think, okay, how did I set this up and why did I do that? I want them to set it up in their way, just so they know it's a reaction if something happens. Hey, you know, I'm having an issue with this, and they know right where to go and how to evaluate that. So I pretty much let them do it their way. If that doesn't work, then we'll kind of do it, you know, cumulatively. We'll talk about it. Then if that doesn't work, then absolutely we'll do it my way. But I think coming into a show, you know, prepared, pretty much knowing that what I want to do, it's, you know, it's pretty much muscle memory at this point for me.
Yeah, and Fred, that brings up a good point. You're handing those books to people, and one of the questions that has come up on the board so far is, how important is your team that you're building to help you build and run that show?
Everyone's handpicked for various reasons. Technically and personality has a lot to do with it. You know, there are times that I will take a lesser technical person with a better personality, because I can teach technical, I can't teach personality. So that has a lot to do with who I pick and why I pick them. There are so many great people around the country that work for all of us, but that's kind of how I pick that. You know, I evaluate personalities, I evaluate the technical perspective of what they do, and I have a good mix of all of that. And the crew that I had this year, especially on the Super Bowl, we've done this before. We've done several Super Bowls together. it makes my life so much easier having somebody that's worked with me on an event like that, that I don't have to really tell them everything that needs to be done. A lot of times they'll come to me and say, hey, Fred, I know you're going to want this, so I went ahead and did that for you. And that's key, is to have that consistency, especially on a large show. I try throughout the season to keep the same people at all the stadiums that we go to for NFL. And when we get to playoffs, I try to carry that same crew through playoffs. I'm not always successful at that, but we try to do that. So by the time we get to the Super Bowl, everything is a well-oiled machine. And the same way with NASCAR. Probably even more so on NASCAR. When we put that together and built that, we tried to keep the same crew for the most part together throughout the years. And once I handed it off to Kevin McCluskey, he's done a great job of continuing that format, where we've done it long enough. They just go out and they do what they need to do. And that allows me to concentrate more on my mix and not have to worry about, okay, what is this person doing? Where do I need to put this person? And what do I need to be prepared for? And that takes a big burden off of my shoulders to have somebody that I can rely on like that kind of thinks the same and knows what I'm thinking.
Absolutely. And so let's kind of stay on this same exact topic and go around the horn here. Dave, we heard paperwork, we heard muscle memory and team. Why don't we kind of follow along in that and say, okay, what's in some of your paperwork, right? And you keep filling in those blanks, but take on those same three big topics there, if you don't mind.
Well, I have to agree. The muscle memory aspect has come into play after, we've all done this for so long, and you have your routine. For me, the interesting thing is the end result is always the same, but every show I'm taking a different path. So that's what keeps it fresh, because we all are faced with unique challenges that come up, and every venue that we're in may have its own idiosyncrasies, and we have to deal with that. So thinking on your feet and having the adaptability, I think, is key, even within that framework of having a structured set of paperwork, if you will. Having the good foundation is key, and that helps in whatever endeavor you're doing. So always having that basic paperwork and premise going into any show is how I approach things. And just to piggyback on what Fred said, is I can't agree more that attitude and personality plays major roles and trumps ability and attitude in A2s. That when you get a young guy who has a fresh willingness and an attitude, it's wonderful to be around those people who doesn't question every move or every request that you ask. I mean, we're all in this together as a team. We're trying to achieve one goal, and you want a team player. And so having those people at your side on all the different shows, it becomes an extension of you, in a sense that so much is not discussed. People just do it because they know how you like your workflow. They just do it. And so that takes a lot of the burden off when we're in the truck dealing with the 48 other issues that we have to deal with from the production side or technical side. Having a solid foundation and having the right people for the right job is key.
Absolutely. And Scott, same questions to you, like on I'll on the paperwork side of things. How detailed? I want to hear on all three of those topics, but I'll question you specifically on paperwork. How detailed do you think you should be versus where the rest of the team fills in the blanks? Are you down to every port number? Are you down to, hey, these are the main IOs, and obviously you feel free to reference this back to Monday night, but that'll be, I assume you have more of a factory type of approach to that. But then when you have the ones that aren't necessarily the same thing week after week. Can you give us kind of a sense of how you would how you like to work?
Sure. I try to be as detailed as possible. Take for instance, you know, a normal NBA weekday game. So the variables you'll run into are what truck do you have, what arena are you in, and I'm lucky in that I normally work with the same production crew because that stays pretty much the same. But I try to be as detailed as possible, and I try to have all paperwork printed before I get on site because Fred and Dave, I don't know if you run into this, but for us, it seems our biggest technical challenge on site is being able to print. Where I've spent the first 2 hours of my day trying to print paperwork. So I try to have it all printed before we get there. And like I say, be as detailed as possible. Of course, you do have to fill in the blanks and things change. You're in an arena where it's a three-way. You've got your show, you've got a home show, you've got an away show. You have to beg, borrow, and steal from each other, help each other out, and share resources. When we talk about Monday Night Football, it is more of a factory. It's the same truck that stays set up all year long, all season long. The variable being the stadium. And we know most of the stadiums, but it is more of a factory. We know exactly what we're going to do when we get there. And a luxury on a show like Monday Night Football is it is the same crew, same A2 crew, week to week, and not only the same A2 crew, but you know, I got Jonathan Freed, one of the premier A1s in the country, as a submixer. I've got Patrick Martin as an audio guarantee. We're staffed well, and we're staffed with some really good people. And to Fred's point about attitude, that is so important because you have to work together as a team. For me, it's all about the team, because I am no good at all without a good team there to support the show. They to me are the most important element. And you know, you were talking about muscle memory, and actually I'm a little worried after taking this break, and not sure how long this break is going to be, how much muscle memory I've lost. And early you referenced the cacophony of the room, and that to me is not like riding a bike. It doesn't just come back automatically that you can all of a sudden listen to all these things at once and hear your mix. You have to, that's something you have to kind of develop, that skill. And that is, I would say, Dave and Fred, I don't know if you agree, but that is one of the hardest things we do, is to hear all of these different people talking and to know when I need to listen to that one, is what he's saying it is important, or the other. And, you know, as far as the actual mix goes and the announcers, I like to say I always hear them, but I'm not always listening to them. But sometimes I have to listen to them because I've heard somebody say we're maybe going to the sideline reporter. Well, I'm actually going to get my real cue from the play-by-play guy who's going to throw to the sideline reporter. So then I know I really have to listen to those words. And
Hey, Scott,
Michael.
How many different sources are you listening to, and are you placing them in different speakers around the room so you have some spatial?
I am. I listen to 3 full-time hot mics. Producer, usually out of on this side, my left ear. Director, usually on this side, my right ear, and the AD usually right behind me. So that does help me separate, and I can, you know, the direction from which the sound is coming kind of gives me a cue of who's talking. It's kind of a funny story. Last year, I worked on the NBA Summer League, and I was actually sitting down as an A1 in 2 other A1 setup. And one of the A1s had all of his hot mics in 3 speakers right above my head. Well, the production crews changed. And so all of a sudden I had 3 new voices that I didn't know any of them, and I didn't know who was speaking. And I can remember sitting there going, okay, she just said ready, one, take one, so she's probably the director. And then I heard someone else counting, and I said, well, she must be the AD. So it was one of the most stressful shows I've done in years, actually, because I couldn't tell who was talking, and I had a hard time following on that show.
Fred, Dave, you do the same type of setup?
I have, yes, multiple speakers to have, producer, director, AD. When people always ask, what's it like in that environment? One of the simplest analogies I give is watch your favorite TV show and take 7 AM radios and put them around your head and turn them up full blast. That's what it's like when we're mixing a show. And you have selective hearing, like Scotty said. You play off words that when you get the notion, okay, I think they're going to go to the sideline, or oh, this real-time replay is coming up. You learn the sense, the direction, and that's the advantage that all three of us have on the network side, is working with the same production all the time. You learn all their voices, you learn their mannerisms, because when you are with the same crew, all of them will agree. You don't get textbook direction or analogies in terms of how the show's going. People just do that, and you kind of have to learn their mannerisms and kind of think before they speak. But yes, having multiple speakers really helps.
Absolutely. There's got to definitely be some spatiality there, because there's no way that you can listen to everything out of an intercom station in front of you. And I'm like Scotty, I have my producer on my left, my director on my right. In Encore, the truck that I'm in primarily, I have my AD coming through the intercom station as well as everything else, but definitely spatiality helps you do that. And listening to producers and directors, and somebody will come in or somebody will ask me, hey, how did the show sound? I have no idea, because the room in a mobile unit, honest to God, is probably the most hostile environment you can listen to. Not only are you listening to cues from 3 different people, if you're troubleshooting something with an A2, or you're talking to your lead tape operator, trying to do some behind the scenes stuff, which we all do. Historically in our rooms, we also have equipment in there, and we all have dealt with intercom fans. We've fans from routing switchers, so it absolutely is the most hostile room to listen to a mix. And I'm like Scotty, I hear what's going on. I'm not listening to what's going on, but it is a learned thing, that selective hearing. I can be listening to announcers, not hearing them, but hearing blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's go to the field. You just key into those certain things. I can be having a conversation with somebody, and because of my selective hearing, I don't hear anything that's going on until there's a term that's pertinent to me, and then I will react to that. With some of the students that I'm involved with over at the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences, I keep telling them my mantra is command, respond, release. I hear a command, I respond to that command, I have to release that command to move on to the next command. Because if I don't release that command and I get hung up on it, I'm going to be behind the rest of the day, and I'm going to have a pretty miserable day. So the mantra has become command, respond, release, and it's just over and over again. It's wash, rinse, repeat, basically. And it is key to have the same groups together, production groups. Like Dave was saying, I know Rich Russo's voice for football. Richie Zients, my AD Rich Gross. I know what kind of mood those guys are in just by hearing 2 words out of their mouth. Same with Joe and Troy when I'm doing football. I can tell what kind of a mood Joe's in as soon as I hear him talk, just because I'm so used to his voice and we've been together for so long that it's really nice. And I think that's the key to what we all do at the level we do it, is we're all a group together and we think for each other. If I hear somebody call a music cue, it kind of throws me off, because I'm kind of in charge of my own music, and it's kind of neat, for them to have that. That faith in me that I'm going to do what's necessary for the production. But if Rich Russo calls roll music, it's like, huh? Oh, okay, sure. So, we kind of, get into our grooves like that.
Sure.
And you do all this while monitoring several different mixes, whether it's a 5.1, a stereo, mono, that you're feeding out through transmission as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's a good introduction to our next topic around this is, I use the term immersive audio just because that's kind of the catchphrase right now, because everybody's, and by that I mean we want to help people to break down that wall, that barrier between what they're experiencing in their living room or in their vehicle or on an iPad, wherever they're at. We want them to join into that action that's happening, right? And so we've just heard a whole complex description from all of you about everything that's going on around you at that time. So knowing that you have all that going on, knowing that you also have a 5-1, maybe you're listening to a down mix of that, and then there is still a place for mono in this world. Um, how how do you build an audience? How does that AR? How does Fred, you mentioned you knew how this stadium sounded, that arena sounded, that racetrack. Let's go around to the three of you and just talk about how is it that you build your audience? How do you capture that energy of the audience? And then me as a viewer understanding that, and then how much are you listening to every little detail? How much of it becomes, okay, I know that this is here, and then maybe how do I connect with my A2 or on the field? Where do they come into play now when it comes to getting this set and ready for the broadcast? So maybe we'll just go around. I'll start with you again. We'll do Fred, Dave, Scott, and just kind of take that and go where you would like with that. I'll leave it to you.
Boy, that's a myriad of questions. There's a lot of information there. We could spend the next 6 hours just on
We could. So how do we want to? Let's talk about creating the listening environment for our audience, right? What not so much, hey, what are the mics you're using? How many of your, and where are you placing them? But rather, what are maybe some fundamentals that you use in order to create that compelling soundscape that obviously has to be consistent week after week, game after game as well?
Well, I go into an event, and again, the three of us have done this long enough that we've come up with our own styles over the years. I basically have two styles of mixing that I really do. I have a certain mix that I do for stick and ball sports, if you will, and then what is considered point of view, like racing. So let's take NFL, for example. If you're sitting in the stands, I want to try to put the viewer somewhat in the stands and taking them to the field occasionally, obviously, when the director cuts to a handheld camera and give you, the spice of that. But basically, I build a 5-1 crowd mix, basically a 4-1, if I have to be honest about it, because we leave the announcers pretty much dry in the center for several reasons. But so I'll build a 360-degree sound field of crowd reaction, because if you're sitting in the stands, they're around you. The benefit of being at home is you don't have the guy behind you pouring beer down your back when he, jumps up and yells or whatever else. So to have that consistency, and then obviously our dialogue stays in the center channel, and then everything else is, for me, is pretty much stereo in front of me, because the field of play never leaves in front of me. Same with baseball. The field of play really never leaves in front of you, but yet we take you around the diamond to bases and runners and things like that. And Joe Carpenter, who does baseball for us at Fox, he and his crew do a phenomenal job of taking you to second base and hearing the bag mics there, or out in the outfield and hearing catches and whatnot. Same way with football. With my sub mixer, Eddie Verstrate, he does the same thing. He provides things for me that I don't have to think about. You were talking about listening to all the little nuances. He's really able to hear more of those nuances than I am, just because that's what he's focused on. I'm more focused on the production and organizing everything, where he's able to take everything and pinpoint what's going on with that and get the best sound possible. So for that, I pretty much will take the viewer, leave them in the stands, and take them to the field when it's necessary. Now, racing's a whole different perspective, because we have cameras around the track and we have cameras in the cars. And so from a racing perspective, my mix is more of a point of view mix. I want to take you into the action itself. I want you to be a part of that action. I want to take you to that camera coming out of turn 4 at Daytona. I want to take you inside the car itself. I want to make sure that the viewer feels like they are an integral part of that sport. To just put a viewer on racing in the stands and have that, you know, the drone of the track going around just doesn't quite cut it. I mean, my philosophy on that is if I see it, I want to hear it. And that's the way with anything, but you still have to have a foundation where you start out with some of that stuff. You know, in NASCAR, we build roar mics. So when we go to a high wide shot, you have that nice 360-degree sound field of the roar of the track. And when the director starts cutting around the track, you know, we're able to take you there, take you inside the car. Where a ball and stick sports, you really never leave the field of play, never leaves from in front of you, except occasionally when we do some cutting around. So those are my two mixing styles that I like to look at.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And I think one of the key things you brought up here is obviously on these level of events, that submixer position is critical, right? Because you know, you're literally, that is almost a show into itself, is creating that. And I'm going to go to Scott next. Dave, I'm going to circle back around because I want to talk about international feeds and the role that, you know, this soundscape happens. And Scott, you could weigh in here too. What you're creating and what your submixer's creating is being shared in more than just one place with me as the home viewer, correct?
It is. We create multiple mixes on most shows that we do. We from site also do a Spanish version, so that comes into play. Back to the general question about the soundscape. Our philosophy, much to how Fred put it, is from the viewer in the stands. We want the home viewer to feel like they're sitting at the arena or in the stadium, and let the crowd sound, the sound field of the crowd build organically. Let it swell naturally. So we want to make you feel like you're in the stands, but then we want to enhance that by taking you to the field on occasion. And you know, on every play we take you to the field somewhat. You know, between the mix of a Skycam mic, perhaps with NFL mics on the centers or the guards. And as Fred was saying, you know, and Kelly, you mentioned that the submix position is such a critical role on these larger shows. It really allows the A1 to get more on the production side of the show, to be able to really get a feel for where the producer and the director are going with the show, being able to watch and see what the mood of the show is at the time, what just happened. And one thing we all, like Fred was saying, music cues. So I spend a lot of my time when I have the luxury of submix with Jonathan Freed on Monday Night Football and NBA once we get to the conference finals and finals. I spend a lot of my time trying to gauge the mood of the show and what's happening on the field or on the court, and looking at my music playback system and going through all the titles and seeing, okay, what music is going to work in this mood? What are my choices? What should I be thinking I'm going to do the next time we go to break? And usually what I'll do is I'll pick 2 or 3 that I'm going to play, depending on if A happens or B happens or C happens right before we go to break. So that's a huge luxury to be able to get more involved in the production side. You know, my submix faders, as a general rule, I set them and forget them. And Jonathan mixes to program. He mixes to the full mix. The only time I ever really dip effects is when we're going to real-time replays, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the general idea of our submix. Was there another question in there that I'm forgetting already?
No, I think that was the idea was, you know, how do you see that? And I think you described that interesting. And you brought up something both you and Fred have touched on, which is the music component of this, that you're leaned on heavily to be a part of that timing, that it's not just the AD or the director. You know, you especially after you build over time that working relationship, you're kind of, sounds like you're looked upon to really fill that seamlessly, even if somebody doesn't give you that exact direction, right? And so that, you know, the music is a key component of that. So yeah, you touched on that perfectly, Scott. You know, I'll move over to Dave with that same question. You know, I brought up had Pete bring up a picture of the parabs, because to me that was an interesting commonality. You normally don't think of those on basketball courts as much as you do on the football field, but the idea of bringing in this sound in, and you know, maybe talk about that, Dave, how you see that fitting in. Sometimes you know, over the years that's kind of been a big focus of yours. I know from common people we have in the industry as friends that, you know, how you're capturing that. Talk about your perspective on this same thing with creating the soundscape, and where you like to see things go.
Well, I've had a few opportunities to experiment and play. Scotty mentioned the NBA Summer League, and I did the Summer League for 10 years plus. And that was my proving ground of experimenting, because we could do whatever we want. There were no rules. So the notion of using a parab came to me when a designer shrunk from a 27-inch down to a 9-inch. And it was a revelation to me because of their properties. If it's truly a parab, the physics and the science behind it worked so natural with an NBA court in terms of the shape and the pattern of those particular parabs. And so much experimentation went behind it, and doing side-by-side comparisons between other types of microphones. I just found that it was essentially a match made in heaven, if you will. The sound that I heard for the first time of hearing the air inside the ball ping, that you never heard before, and because of the way the focus of the parab worked, and depending upon the mic element you use the frequency, at higher frequencies it became tighter focus, and it just lent itself naturally to the sounds of the ball and the squeaks. And it was just one of those things that I said to myself, hey, we use these on football, we use them on some of the bigger postseason baseball shows. Why not try it on basketball? And it worked.
Sure. So you know, I think that's part of what we also are discovering, the unintended application, or the happy accident, as Bob Ross on PBS would put it, that when we're capturing those sounds, the nuances we can hear today that we couldn't really experience necessarily as well in years past, maybe drive that. One of the questions that's been coming in is around RF, and obviously you know, the parabs are a perfect example of that application. The cars being completely different RF than what maybe we're used to in the audio industry, right? Because that telemetry and all the information coming back from the car may be bundled together. But let's talk about that. You know, Scott, I'm going to start with you. With RF, what are, number one, two questions related to it. One is, where do you see it getting the most use in your particular applications, in your mixes, your shows? And number two, how do you work with the understanding that RF technically stands for random failures? How do you plan accordingly for those kind of things?
What do you say? What do you say, Michael? Ouch.
Ouch.
Sorry, I had to go there because, you know, I'm pretty sure I see on everybody's console somewhere that says BU or copper, you know, because we're paid to think about everything that could happen, right? Not just what we want to happen. So, Scott, you want to share some of your feelings on the use of RF and when and where and how?
Yes, and we do try to back up wherever we can, mainly, you know, talent mics. If you lose the sideline reporter, that can really damage the show. So we always want to have a backup available for that. But there are certain things that RF is the only way to accomplish it. Let's look at NBA. On most NBA shows, we mic both coaches and the ref. That's not to be used live. You know, it's screened and possibly put into packages for playback. Occasionally, we also mic to a couple of players. And then you look at, you know, NFL or any football show. If you had to hardwire your parabs, that's just problematic from a logistics standpoint, as far as cabling on the sidelines and then getting into the proper positions. I've heard that on Super Bowl, you guys actually do hardline your parabs, but you have like 120 of them or something like that, Fred. I'm not sure what your count is there. But, you know, and of course, the RF world is getting more and more challenging, as Michael can attest, but Michael is real good about keeping us at the leading edge of technology. And we feel comfortable where we are in the RF that we're using, but we always keep in the back of our mind that anything can fail at any point, and we certainly want to have a backup plan for that.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, RF is huge in our world, and you know, having a good RF tech is absolutely key. You know, I was fortunate enough on Thursday night and rolling into Super Bowl to have Matt Hooten with me, and I got to tell you, without having somebody that pays attention to detail and has that work, it can be our worst nightmare. And you know, I've got to jump on what Scotty said about Mike Mason and CP, you know, keeping us at the front end, you know, front side of technology. You know, Mike Mason's, you know, comment usually to me when I call him for something is bring lots of cable. Well, that's fine and dandy and all, but you know, when cars are going around a racetrack for 500 miles, I can't really put 500 miles of cable out there as it, you know, coils up. But and that's its own beast in itself. But you know, at Super Bowl, to answer your question, Scott, is we had 8 parabs. We had 2 hardline end zones, and then I had 4 RFs going up and down the sidelines. Okay. And I'll tell you what I found for that is the coverage actually works much better for that because, you know, again, Eddie can manipulate that, you know, so he has coverage pretty much everywhere we need to go. You know, as you well know, the biggest part that we can't cover is the middle of the field because we're restricted between the 35-yard lines behind the bench areas and all of that stuff. So that's where he has to get creative and make that work, and he does a very good job of that. But you know, for us, it's the key for RF is not only the parabs but the sideline talent. You have a couple of things going on there. Obviously, you have a microphone coming back to you. You have a talkback coming back from you from there, and then we have the IFBs that go to them. So, you know, we've got several components in there, and any part of that fails, and you know, we all have a pretty bad day, you know. But again, we put copper backups. I put copper everywhere anyway for backups. We used the new Shure system this year, and we were able to use the Quadversity in the locker rooms and around the field, and I didn't have to take anybody off of a wireless mic and put them on a wire anyplace. I was that comfortable because of the crew and again, having a great RF specialist that paid attention to all details was just, you know, key to making that whole thing work.
Yeah, and Dave, how about you with your RF applications?
Yeah, I for this past NFL season, I give props to Michael and CP, and I actually called him after the first week, and I said, Michael, thank you, because they upped and upgraded all the packages to Axion Digital, which I've been using, that has been rock solid and had zero issues this past NFL season, rock solid. And so I was very happy that Michael took the initiative to do that for us, and it worked fabulous. The one thing that I just want to say from a basic standpoint is when we have RF on the show, it comes down to knowledge, and knowledge is power. And I've seen and have been in some circumstances where it's unfortunate that a lot of A2s don't embrace that philosophy of knowledge is power. And I say that because when I see antenna placement or how they mount some of the equipment surrounding that, and it's prone to failure. And the one thing that I try to stress to a lot of young people, especially when it comes to RF and the unknown, is everyone has every manual in the world right here. You can download a PDF. If you have a question and it can't be answered, you can download something and look at a manual and look at a manufacturer's recommendation. It's instead of just ignoring the issue, I always tell young people, be proactive. And
Right.
and when people do that, it's amazing how the success rate goes way high.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Kelly,
so
Kelly,
go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think I want to jump back just a little bit to the crowd applications, because when sports does come back, and there's a couple of questions that come in, there's a good chance that they're going to be playing to empty stadiums and arenas. So how do you three see filling in that background without any crowd there?
Retirement.
Yeah, you can't take the easy way out. That's like that. No.
It's going to be different. It's going to be different, especially, I'll pick NBA, for example. I do Thursday night NBA with TNT. And the energy that you get from that audience adds so much to the show. And, Scotty can attest to it as well, doing it on ESPN, that there's so much that goes unnoticed, or you don't think about it really, about that energy. And when it's not there, yeah, you're going to hear a lot more squeaks, you're going to hear a lot more ball bounce, but the reaction after, say, a great slam, it's going to be interesting how you fill that void. And it's going to be fun to experiment, I guess. But there's so many unknowns right now, what these cavernous rooms are going to sound like.
My philosophy on that is kind of like watching a movie and seeing and hearing a big explosion without the sound there. The visual part of the explosion isn't nearly as impactful as it is with sound. And I agree with Dave, that the reaction of the crowd, it does a couple of things. It actually, enhances obviously the broadcast, but it also gets the players up and going. Everybody wants to hear their name chanted in the arena if they make a 3-pointer or something like that. So it's going to have a huge impact, I think, on player performance, not just the sound of a broadcast, but players themselves. I think it's going to have a big impact with them not being there. We've been talking at Fox about how to address some of this stuff, and we've got some ongoing conversations of how we want to do that and what we're willing to try. I think part of it is not just the television perspective or aspect on this, is we've got to get the leagues on board with it. We've got to get the owners, we've got to get the commissioners, we've got to get the players associations. we can't just, say, hey, this is what we're going to do and go out and do that. There are a lot of different, entities involved with making those decisions, how we approach that, how we do it. Do we put crowd in the arena for them and put our normal crowd mics up and listen to the ambience of that plus some electronic crowd replacement? Or do we not do that in the arenas but do it for television? I mean, there are so many things that we have to still discuss and come up with some, some applications to make that work. And it will be different, for all of us. I think we're going to hear more of the nuances of the sport itself, but we have to be careful too, because as my two colleagues have experienced, when they start dropping the F-bomb and they start, cursing at each other, we're going to hear that clear as day. If there's no crowd to bury that in, I mean, there are a lot of things we need to take into consideration with that. It's not just, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to hear everything that we want to hear with no crowd. We can hear the nuances of the event. We'll just be aware that there are other things going on there that we don't want to hear.
Excellent.
That's a good point, Fred, and we have discussed that, especially as it relates to NBA. You're in such a closer environment. Our microphones are closer to the action, and we're worried about the profanity problem, how we're gonna handle that, because you don't want every 30 seconds to have a plunger, somebody in a room cutting out all that profanity, and like y'all said, the crowd itself enhances the experience for everyone, the player, the fan in the arena or the stadium, the fan at home. It's an integral part of it. And one thing it does, I know for me, one thing that worries me a little bit about it being so quiet is also the crowd helps to cover your transitions. When you're transitioning microphones, you've got a little bed there to play with, where you can make transitions and they're not going to be too obvious, but you get in a really quiet environment and your transitions are going to become more apparent. But it's going to be interesting. I don't know how it will all end up. The positive is, yes, we'll be able to hear more of that intimate action on the court, or on the field, but it's an overall loss for the show if a crowd is not there.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I build a sound bed out of the crowd, as all of us do, and it's a great place to mix in and out of. It's like building a great rhythm section, on a piece of music. I can build a great rhythm section and bring, vocals, soloists, whatever else in and out of that. It gives me a place to make that transition. So, I think sometimes we overlook the necessity of a crowd and in the role that they play, inside of a broadcast itself, just because of some of those transitions to give it the flow and it truly is the foundation of what we do in a broadcast.
And room tone is not going to take the place of a crowd. No way.
Do you think there's any application for bringing a crowd in via some of these other technologies, whether it be Zoom or GoToMeeting or,
Well, that's what I was just going to say, that I hope that, like Scotty said earlier about mixing as being organic as possible. I hope that my production on, let's just say, an NBA game or a NFL game doesn't mandate to say that, okay, we have to put a crowd loop bed behind. I think to me, my opinion is it'll sound very stale. Yes, there'll be some ambient and some reaction behind the action, but there is no feedback of the call and response. What you see is what you get. And it just, to me, would sound unnatural. So I hope that people don't feel that just because if we go back to empty stadiums, that out of necessity, you have to fill artificially that ambience. I just don't think, in my opinion, that it would sound very good.
Right. Well, and that's where during my shows, and I think a lot of you guys, we don't do any sweetening live whatsoever. I depend on the crowd there as to what it is, but there might become a time, and that might be the time, without having that live crowd, to look at, hyper reality is what I like to call it, versus reality, where something is sweetened. And these are some things I think that we need to try, just to see where we are and see how it actually reacts. But in a normal situation, absolutely not. I wouldn't want to enhance that. But where we might be dealing with some hyper reality, now might be the time to do that. I don't know. Those are some questions that are yet to be answered, and we're just going to have to do some testing and trial and error. You guys are going to have to do it on NBA. I know we're talking about some baseball stuff and golf, especially, how do you do that, with the surge of a crowd when, a 56-foot birdie putt's made or something like that. There's so many different nuances that we have to look at with that. It's not going to be easy, and it may not be right. Who knows? And somebody's perspective may say, hey, I love having, artificial crowd there, and somebody else is going to say, absolutely not. I actually had a text chain with Joe Buck the other day, and my comment to him was, just think about it. You're not going to have any fans there to turn around and curse at you and Troy.
That's
one of the things you're bringing up is really interesting, because we're technologists, right? So we solve problems through technology, right? We're trained to be problem solvers. Show me enough problems, I'll solve them, and we've done a show, right? And that's kind of the process we go through. So we can find solutions. The interesting things I'm starting to hear about out there is that this could be an 18-month window, right, that we're looking at, and long term we go back to the same soundscape that we were used to. The audience is back in there, and maybe some of this is about, in the short term, being able to get through a moment in time, right? Getting we were talking before this before we went on, and said, basically, what is NBC doing with Saturday Night Live? What is the American Idol last night? Things like that. And we're seeing these moments in time that are solutions for the problem we have right at this very moment, and they're very innovative, right? And they spark thoughts. I don't, personally, I don't see this being a long-term playing to an empty arena, playing to empty stadiums. So, do we turn everything up on its head for the next 18 to 24 months? Do we embrace some new creative ideas, trying things, because you aren't going to necessarily get fired for it? But Fred, you pointed out a really interesting point. There are a lot of stakeholders, unlike, say, in the local sports, right? If you would think about how you come up through the ranks in sports audio, right? You're maybe working on the high school tournaments, the college games, obviously, things like that. And they have a little different, maybe ESPN or whoever your broadcast outlet is, has their policies for miking, but nothing like NFL, NBA, Olympics, right, where we have entire books of standards that have to be agreed upon. One of the questions that came in is dealing with coaches, right, and coach mics and player mics and all these things. Well, as a guy who was an A2 and had his mic thrown at him by the manager of the Chicago Cubs at the time because he was caught saying a few things and blamed it on me, it was not my fault, right? That's the A1's problem. But guess who got the mic chucked at him? That was me, right? But when we're dealing with those kind of situations, a lot of our innovative ideas have to be vetted through a lot of different directions. You guys find that being creative at your level, it sounds like you've got the ear of all the right people and the trust. What happens when you come up with an idea or something? How do you bring it to be used in a broadcast?
A lot of promises and hoping those promises aren't broken. I mean, seriously, so if say, on NFL, we used to wire the umpire, back that all started in 1994, is finally we were able to get a microphone on field versus just the Prabs up and down the sidelines, but we actually now had a live mic on the field. Well, there was control by the umpire himself with a switch, and there was control by the green hat on the sideline with a switch. And the idea of that was they would open the mic prior to the, just as the break of the huddle through the initial surge of the play, and then they would close the mic to us. Well, we all promised, and we've all done this, so you guys are as guilty as I am, is over the years we decided, hey, you know what, we can get a lot more if we start bypassing some of this stuff, and so basically we cheated. Well, at some point in time, because of the arrogance of where we are and what we're doing, the green hats figured out that, hey, this switch is bypassed, it doesn't do anything, because they would turn the switch off and we would still be hearing audio on that, right? So that kind of was a little bit of a black eye for us, but that proved for us, though, that we were trying to be innovative to bring more there than we had in the past. And as they say in racing, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. Sometimes it works to our favor and sometimes it doesn't work, in our favor. But when we try to do something now, because the stakes are so high, I mean, there's so much money involved and so many entities involved that we really don't have the luxury of trying a lot of things that we used to do. I always kind of got a tickle out when, God rest his soul, Bob Siderman, my mentor, when we first went to Fox, he was still mixing the A game for a couple of years before his passing, and I was the B mixer. I could get away with murder because nobody was focusing on my shows. I could try so many different things, and it was a great place for me to try things and to learn things. But because the microscope was on that A show, he couldn't get away with very many things at all. So sometimes you're able to get away with more in a lesser profile event than you are being there. So it's just difficult. We do our best to go out and do some trial runs and testing with stuff, but then we have to present it, and then we have to try it. And if it works, great. And the thing is, in today's society, we rarely get a chance to do it again. You get to try it once, and if it fails, you're done. Versus, okay, let's get in there and let's try to make this thing work to our advantage. Sometimes we just don't have that luxury. And it's the same with new and upcoming mixers. I feel bad for them because the demands of a mixer now are such that we're not able to make any mistakes. And if we do make mistakes, it's pretty apparent what happens. So as these A2s or even students that are coming up and through, when we put them in the chair, if something happens and they don't do a perfect show, it comes back from production people, oh, this guy was horrible, I don't ever want to see him again. Well, you got to give somebody a chance, like we had the chances early on, to go in and make some mistakes and move forward. But because I think of the attitudes of some of the the executives is, hey, it's got to be perfect. If it's not perfect, we move on, and that's pretty unfair.
Yeah, Fred,
I agree. If I could just jump on that for a quick second, what Fred is saying is so true. When we came up, the shows were so much smaller, and the equipment was not the same, and the responsibilities that we had weren't like what they are today. And I'll give you 3 instances. Is today the mixer is responsible, obviously, for the mix. He's also responsible of populating the router, and then he's also responsible for programming the intercom. Years ago, truck EICs would never let you touch the intercom nor the router. You didn't have access to it. But now it falls on the A1 shoulder, and there's a lot more responsibility. And the other thing that's really different is the immediate feedback of social media. It has just floored me to see the response of executives following what they're reading off Twitter or something else and want you to change because of what someone is reading and having those.
Yeah, that's a very small percentage of the people that actually like what you're doing, and they tend to react to the negative, the small percentage of negative versus the large amount of good.
I've had a few circumstances where there's been some comments made, and my first reaction, especially to people who are in the listening room, don't have any negative comments. But then all of a sudden they want you to react because someone posted something online, and that weighs more than the trained professional who's listening to what you're doing. Sometimes it's backwards. It doesn't make sense.
Right. I don't think, I'm sorry, Dave, I don't think we can ignore those responses. I think we need to look at those because, you know, for the most part, our job is to cater to the viewer, because the viewer's tuning in, paying for the advertising, and you know, eventually paying our salaries. Does it need to be the primary focus? No, I don't think so. I think we need to look at those responses and remarks and address those in a logical fashion, not in a reactive fashion, but a proactive fashion.
Right, and that's where muscle memory comes into play, is that someone else is behind and paying the bills. You may not necessarily agree with the philosophy, but this is what they want. This is what you give them. And so you have to throw your ego aside and give them the best product that you can provide for them, irregardless if you agree with it or not.
That's true. You know, we've run into the same thing, feedback from social media, even feedback, you know, your play-by-play guy gets a text from one of his buddies and says, "Hey, I can't hear you." An executive calls in and says, you know, the effects are too loud. You have to listen to those things, but we also, our philosophy is we have to rely on the people that are there for those standards. Like you're talking about the listening room. How does it sound leaving the truck? Hey, you know, how does it sound in transmission back at the plant? Are they happy with it? You know, when you get feedback from people who are, you know, listening in an unknown environment, unknown system, not sure what market they're in, those are things that need to be investigated. If one certain area of the country or one certain market is having problems, the local distributor there might have a problem, and we need to look at that. But you know, we try to rely on the professionals in the line of transmission. If it's good leaving the truck, it's good leaving the plant, we're not going to make an adjustment. We can come back and investigate why in this certain market or that they were having a problem. But, you know, Fred and Dave, back to your point about, you know, show size and complexity. And, you know, I never really get too worried about walking into a Monday Night Football game. I don't get too nervous. You know, I try to make sure that I'm up and I'm ready for it. A show that would scare me would be a college basketball game with a 5-hour call. Working with a production crew I'm not familiar with, on a truck I'm not familiar with, A2s I'm not familiar with. And I feel sorry for the guys that are coming up today, because when, you know, us three, when we came up, the shows were so much smaller and so much less complicated. And we did have a little leeway to make our mistakes, to learn. But now the expectations right off the bat are so high, no matter what the size of the show. It can be a small college basketball game, but they want it to sound like a major, you know, NBA game. And they want all those complexities, production complexities, technical complexities that you do on the smaller show are now expected on the, that you do on the larger shows are now expected on the smaller shows, with a lot less time, a lot less facilities, a lot less support. And I am worried, and we've all been in forums where we've talked about this, where are the next generation of A1s coming from? Because it is so challenging to break in, and if you're not allowed to grow and to make some mistakes, if you do a show and have a couple of problems, and automatically you've got a black market, and we're not going to see you again. it's really hard developing this next generation of guys, because I look at all these squares and we're not as young as we once were.
There is that little fact.
That's
So, you know, here's a question I have for the three of you, because this is a question, Scott, what you just brought up was exactly what there were like 2 or 3 questions that have come in around this very thing. Is it fair that an A1 has to deal with comms? Is it appropriate, or, you know, with that as much of a load, you know, and we're talking about coming up through the ranks. We're not necessarily talking about the event you're on currently, right? But to your point, is there opportunity in this down market for the truck vendors to with proper social distancing and with some other things to be able to allow people? One of the comments that came up is, how do I get more time behind an AZ edit, right, terminal? How do I learn to be more proficient at something without the pressure, the moment to moment pressure that is the show, right? Especially if you're that A1 who is responsible, or, you know, Dave and I have a common friend, Taco. You know, thank God if you got Taco around, right? But if you don't, you're out there. And are there opportunities now that we're thinking differently for at least this moment in time, let's say for the next year here? Is that something that there is opportunity that we can push the industry to say, look, come in, you know, a Calrec, you're not going to step up behind an Artemis or an Apollo, having been running, you know, an Allen and Heath, or even a Digico SD7 for that matter, and sit down at that console and immediately start moving things, right? There's this, you know, go ahead, Fred.
I think that's where the challenge comes in is, and that's what took me, and I'm going to do a shameless plug here for the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences. That's what took me there, is being an audio school, and they were everything audio except for broadcast. And once I took them out to a remote and showed them how much audio was there, it's like they signed on and we created a curriculum. So the beauty of what happens there that I'm very proud of is when we built the control rooms in our small little 35-foot truck, is I mandated that everything go in there that we use out in the field. So we're trying to give students the opportunity to learn real world stuff, if you will. You know, I made sure that we had a small RTS system there. Everybody gets on their laptop when they sign in, AZ Edit. So we run through, so when they leave, they have basic understanding of programming, AZ Edit and whatnot. But part of their graduation is having an internship someplace. And that's where we're running into problems, is placing students into internships, because in the sports world, as we all know, everything is done on site. So you have travel and expenses that have to be taken care of, and not everybody's willing to take care of that traveling expenses. So how do you give them experience as an intern if you have no outlet for that? And so that's become a different, you know, very difficult part. And also we recently ran into some union issues where we had placements of some students we were going to put into some markets, and the union stepped in and said, absolutely not. I've got people sitting down, you know, at the hall that need employment, need work. We're not going to allow you to bring an intern in to learn a craft to replace somebody that's already qualified to do that job, if they are indeed qualified to do that job. So we've run into some issues there, and that's been pretty frustrating for us to provide all of the knowledge and give somebody an opportunity to have a career, but have roadblocks put in place by either policies with HR at networks or policies within union markets. And then a lot of times they're not even welcomed by the local A2s, because the local A2s a lot of times are so insecure about their position that I'm not going to train anybody to take my job. And I understand that to a degree, but maybe you should be a little, you know, maybe you should educate yourself more on that. And sorry, I got off on my tangent a little bit of that. So AZ Edit is, those are places to learn basics like that, but until you're on a show, there's really no way to learn that. You know, the three of us were brought up under some very talented people. In fact, they pretty much wrote the book on how to do sports audio, between Mark Radulovich, Bob Siderman, Ronnie Scalise, you know, Bob Dixon, you know, these guys that came before us that we picked up and you know, we're fortunate enough to carry the torch. They paved the way for us to get there. The opportunity with the the timeline of a show, if you're doing a single day set, shoot, strike, which most local shows are, I'm very fortunate. I don't have to, when I'm home, I'm home. You know, when I'm gone, I'm working. So I don't deal a lot with local shows where I once did. But when you're on a single day set, shoot and strike, there's just absolutely no time to be mentored. Where we had the luxury, and especially myself early on, for a D-level NFL game on CBS in the mid 80s when I was coming up, you know what? I'd travel only on a Wednesday. I'd have a set Thursday, Friday, Saturday, game Sunday. And this was one hardline sideline reporter, 3 hardline parabs, 4 tape machines. And I had 4 days to set up. Now I have thousands of sources by populating the router, populating the intercom system, plus, you know, programming my console if I'm in a new truck, in a single day set, shoot and strike. So the workload has just really become tremendous, and there's just no time to teach and or mentor. So going back to your question, how do we give those guys that education? I don't know. I'm open for suggestions. I'm open to how do we get people that want to be in the industry and have a basic knowledge of this, how do we give them that experience? That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, one of the and feel free, Scott, Dave, weigh in on that. Wherever, you know, I think to my point was like, you know, the Game Creeks and the NEPs, and then even the second or the third, fourth market truck companies, that idea of the open house, right? That of do we I am convinced more than ever we have to think differently. The same way the 3 of you are going to have to approach sports for the next 1.5 to 2 years like you never did. Actually, it may be closer to what you used to do when you had a very limited amount of resources available to you. Imagining that simple game, Scott, you were describing when you first came into the industry, right? Except that now it's imposed not technically, but because of all these outside forces, right? And we capture things because we can, but I think unconventional approaches, and I guess I would challenge you, the 3 of you, wherever, you know, we can, how do we affect that change to help people better themselves in these kind of moments that when you're coming out of university and you're going, all right, I invested X, and there is no industry X now to go into. If I need to learn this skill and become more proficient at it, because that's where opportunity. So that's I guess to my point is to just say, okay, where can we have that voice? And you don't have to answer that per se. It's more of just a rhetorical, that where we have that opportunity to apply those applications.
It is a challenge.
Go ahead.
It is a challenge. You know, like Fred said, the opportunities are hard to come by because of the lack of time. And the other thing you mentioned, you know, those truck vendors. In this day and age of the technology that we're using, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars spent to put one of these mobile units together. There's a huge investment. Those truck companies can't afford to let that truck sit in the shop. It has to roll and work. And that's the unfortunate side of things, with this pandemic time excluded. But generally speaking, those trucks are rolling. They are constantly working. They're not sitting idle because they can't afford to, because there's a huge investment that has to be taken care of. And that's the unfortunate side of things. Having an open house, Kelly, would be a fantastic thing, especially in bigger markets, to let young people or people who want to gain more knowledge to come in and have a seminar for AZ edit, mixing, someone who wants to learn video, how to edit and work an EVS controller, things like that. It's just that this day and age, there's too much investment, and that they need the return quicker. So I don't really know what the answer is. The only time that I try to encourage it is on these bigger shows, when there is more setup time, you know, like the Super Bowl. This past February here locally, you know, I did the NBA All-Star game, and that is a 9-day setup. And we did bring a bunch of students in because there's so much more time involved to show and teach and do some things. But on a normal basis, we are pretty busy, you know, because of the lack of setup time.
Yeah, Fred, hats off to you for all the work you've done with young folks and bringing them along and into this business. You've done a fantastic job with that. You know, you mentioned NEP and Game Creek. I know both companies have very aggressive internship programs for their staff. That's how they are developing their new engineers for their trucks. For, you know, a good bit of the new people that they're putting on trucks have come through their intern program. You know, I wish that we could have something similar on our side of the industry, but you're dealing with certain hard facts like budget. We want to bring this new guy in and, you know, bring him along this path, and the question comes, well, who's going to pay for it? Because you know, budgets are tight all the way around, and Lord only knows what the new normal is going to be once this pandemic is over, what budgets are going to look like, because everybody's getting hit pretty hard. But, you know, I think a lot of it still boils down to the individual. If someone is already on the show in a role, maybe a newer A2, but is energetic, inquisitive. I see it all the time, and I always keep my eyes open for that next guy. You know, who's the next guy that really wants to learn? Does he, instead of when he has some downtime, instead of just piddling around, is he learning something new? Is he on Asiatic? Is somebody teaching him some new tricks? Is he learning new aspects of what we do? So at least for now, it really boils down to the individual, how much energy they want to put into it, what they want to learn. And I think everyone would agree, whenever we see someone like that, we do our best to support them and bring them along.
I know one thing that I've talked to the students about, you know, and try to beat into their head, learn IP technology. Everything is going IP. It's not just about mixing anymore. It's not about plugging a patch cord anymore. You know, I emphasize to them, if you want to make it in this business, or really any business anymore, become an IT savvy person, because without that, you're just not going to make it in any of these industries any longer.
That's actually a great transition, Fred, because it's come up a couple of times on the question board, is where do you see the uses of the audio over IP technologies, including for intercom, and how does it work into your shows now, the reliability factor, the deployment factor, and you just mentioned the knowledge base that needs to go into using it. So if the three of you want to address that.
Well, I'll just share my little experience. This year, I got a new truck from NEP, SS8, and it's the first 100% IP truck. There's others out there that are partial IP, but every aspect of that truck is IP, audio over IP. The router, the EVS machines, the intercom, audio from the outside in. And yeah, there was a few stumbling blocks on the first couple shows, getting everything to play nice with one another. And that's the thing, that when you have all these manufacturers making great product unto itself, but then when you integrate it into a truck, and this piece has to talk to that piece, whereas they weren't integrated like that before. So there's some stumbling blocks, and having that knowledge of IP and being computer savvy, networking is huge. But one of the things that we discovered on that truck was the clocking. With audio over IP, the clock, the master clock, is absolutely key to making everybody play nice with each other's piece of gear. And once we got the clocking issues, our timing got much more in line, and it's been rock solid. I mean, it's beautiful having just, you know, some Cat5 cables and with massive amounts of signals running over it. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to throw to Fred real quick, because I know, Fred, you've got a call. Can you maybe weigh in on this topic on your way out? It's a big one, but it is, you know, networked. I mean, whether it's the Calrec Hydra and their new, you know, and I just saw that they were going to announce at NAB the box now for transiting, you know, right, and doing AOIP conversion and WAN. And you weigh in real quick?
Absolutely. Actually, thanks. Yeah, I've got until I've got a call at the top of the hour, so I can hang until about 55.
Cool.
You know, right now I'm using kind of a hybrid, you know, Dante booth system with, you know, some analog backups and everything. Part of my fear is, and this is just my old analog background, is on copper, if I plug a mic in, I know that mic's going to be there. If I plug an IFB in, I know it's going to be there. You know, once, and I'll be honest with you, the digital world still is kind of foreign to me, even though we've been into it for years and years and years and years. I think it's the way the industry is going, and we need to accept that and embrace that. It's very difficult. I mean, my fingernails are just starting to grow back from being dragged into this digital world, you know, of consoles, you know, 15 years ago. So for me, you know, I know it's a necessity. I know it's coming. I'm trying to educate myself on that. That doesn't mean that I'm completely embracing that. I think there are too many failure points in that are unknowns. I know when I need to troubleshoot something in an analog world, I can plug it into a meter, I can do whatever. Once you start, you know, turning audio into bits, it's very difficult to troubleshoot. It's very difficult to, you know, find a path where it's actually going at any point in time. Part of what concerns me being out on a remote, even though we've gotten better about shore power being reliable, I'm concerned about power to equipment, that encoders and decoders and you know, whatever else. Yeah, we have UPS systems, but if, say, on the field, if there's an A2 out on the field that has, you know, everything powered through either a, you know, a Hydra 2 network or a Dante network or however they're doing that, and they lose shore power to that particular rack, sure, the UPS is going to go off, but with the crowd screaming out there, they're never going to hear the warning sounds of that, you know, of that UPS saying, hey, I need help here, you know, I've lost power, I'm going to shut down pretty soon. That's fine and dandy and all, but it's just, to me, it's still a failure point that I haven't come comfortable with. I'm still kind of, I'd say 80% still analog in a lot of places, other than my booth and having some hybrid stuff up there. So that's kind of where I am. I know it's the future. I know, and that's where I want people coming into the industry to become more IP, you know, savvy than I am. And, you know, a lot of us older guys that are going to age out here pretty soon, is to make sure you understand that, because that is the future. And like Dave said, he's in an all IP truck. There are going to be some challenges with that stuff. You know, I know in the Dante stuff I use, sometimes there's stuff that just comes unchecked. It just disappears. You have to, I don't have time if I'm sitting at a console to turn around and go into Dante controller and go, okay, why did this do that? Why, whatever else, as the director's yelling, okay, stand by, roll, track red, gosh darn it, where's red? You missed the cue. I don't have time for that stuff where, you know, it's just a challenge. And
Sure.
it's a new world, you know, it's like anything, it's still fear of the unknown.
Yeah, kind of we don't know what we don't know yet.
Exactly.
Right?
I have to agree. The biggest challenges is the fact of troubleshooting. There's no clear defined path when you're doing audio over IP and Dante where to troubleshoot. That's right now, I think, the biggest fear factor for a lot of people is, unlike conventional methods that we all were brought up on, it's very easy to troubleshoot. But when it comes to checking something on a Cat5 or where's that signal getting lost in the controller, much bigger challenge. And so that, I think, for a lot of people is a big unsettling factor, that at some point, I'm sure it'll get better, but in the short term, it's like a leap of faith. You have to embrace it, and I think, if you go all in, you might get burned, but just with all technology that has come and gone, at some point you have to embrace it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm wondering if any of the guys I normally work with are watching this, how I would respond to this. I'll be quite frank. I think it's a bunch of damn black magic, personally.
Kind of like RF was.
Yeah.
It still is.
But it is the way the industry is moving. It's a train that's left the station, and it's not going to stop. So we do have to embrace it. The thing that concerns me the most on these systems, Dante, et cetera, is recovery time. If I have a failure, how long does it take me to get back up? We had conversations, Bob Walsh at NEP, we were looking at EN1, which is the Monday Night Football truck. And we were talking about moving to, a Dante booth set up, Dante field. And, my comment was, well, I don't want to make a change just for change's sake. Now, if there's a compelling reason for us to do this, then we should do it. And that happened last year. And the compelling reason was, in our Monday Night Football booth, the set was so elaborate and took up so much space, we had to reduce our footprint to give enough room up there. So we downsized our booth kit substantially by moving to a Dante system. But we also still have a Hydra system. So essentially, I'm running two systems at the same time, Dante and Hydra. In fact, the announcer mics, I have a choice. Michael, remind me of the model number of talkback box I'm using. I don't remember the ST, whatever it is. But anyway,
206.
Yeah, but there's a analog output that we put down the Hydra, and that's actually the feed I'm going to air with, because that CalRec preamp is a little bit better than the Studio Technology preamp. But we can do a changeover within minutes. Well, no, actually, we can do a full changeover probably within a minute in our booth to go completely with Hydra and a combination of Hydra and copper. And we can do something similar on the field. It really, these, I'm glad I have younger guys on my crew who are smarter than me when it comes to, internet technologies, because most of it is beyond me. But I rely on those younger guys to help figure that stuff out and help this old man out.
I'm exactly the same way. I feel the same thing. I rely so much on the younger guys that, and I've got two great guys that travel with me on Thursday night that just carry me, and it's kind of nice. But it is, and we have to embrace the new technology. I'm the same way as you, Scott. I've got Dante in the booth, I've got Hydra up there, and I've got copper, and I can go between any of the three formats pretty much within a minute and change that entire booth over, fairly quickly.
Right.
Just because of the comfortability factor for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like from the network standpoint, I think that's what we're hearing across the entire audio industry, right? Regardless of the market segment, we understand that Dante is here to stay. We understand that AES 67 is here to stay. SMPTE 2110, we talked about it about a week ago, and the complexities. That thing is so awesome and so incredibly complex all at the same exact moment in time, right? But it sounds like here's some opportunities for people that are coming into the industry or want to set themselves apart. Studio Technologies is a great example of a company that's picked up PLs, mic announcer consoles, all embracing Dante, right? And Fred, I know you've got to get out of here. And I really appreciate you being a part of this conversation. I would challenge everybody. We're going to keep the conversation going for just a little bit longer since I sold the entire 2-hour block. You know, well, I didn't really sell it, but you know what I mean. The idea of
I did. I sold it.
yeah, you sold it, Michael.
I
And
sold it.
the whole thing being, number one, we're in a different industry model right now when we will be for the short term, and very possible that the short term will have a very disproportional effect on our long-term play, right? And so where does that opportunity lie? Fred, you really are out front there with that education, and please keep doing that. We all are better because of it. The tools you've implemented, I've actually taken, like the Studer courses and things online that make us all better at what we do. This networking thing, though, could be a way to help mitigate some of this comms challenge, right? The new loads, and bringing in a team member now that is that network IP person, right? And driving, yes, does it drive the budget? Maybe, but it's also somebody who brings value to the operation at the same time that helps us to shore up, because just because we're going into challenging times, like you mentioned, Scott, the economic model for the foreseeable future is going to be a little different across all of production. So, you know, the opportunity in IP is massive. The brain power, I'm not sure that I've got it, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give it a big bear hug. But Fred, I'm gonna go ahead and let you take off. I'll just dismiss you because sometimes it's easier to.
Fred,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say one thing. I've been
Yes, sir.
listening. Great show so far. However, I am one of those younger people who's available to help you out on the show, doing all this other stuff. So just keep me in mind.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I can hang for about another 10 minutes there,
Okay.
Kelly. So
All right,
well,
great.
Still about 55.
All right, so Pete, pull up that picture of Dave's package that he carries for the trucks. It's got analog rack, and you know, just so you know, Dave did not pay for this placement. Okay, this is just me. I decided to do that as the host and booker, but I really thought long and hard about what to say under there, but what old is new again. Analog in the digital world. We heard so many examples from everybody today about copper, right? Copper's not going away. The type of copper, the connector that's on it is going to change. Where do you folks see this ability to take what's old, laid into the new? Fred, since you're leaving, or maybe not, but can you weigh in here, and we'll go you and then Scott and then Dave?
I think it's a delicate balance of still trying to use some of our favorite, especially, you know, external processing pieces of gear. You know, a lot of productions are going to plugins. You know, those of us that have lived in the broadcast world for as long as we haven't had the luxury of using plugins directly into a console, you know, on some of the larger consoles that we use. You know, a lot of the music guys, you know, are using plugins because that's how those consoles were designed. So even though we're using external processes and starting to move more that direction with plugins, if you will, again, it comes to a comfortability factor. I think that I think the plugins are great and everything, but until we can get those baked into the console itself, not have that extra failure point of having an external box, once again, either power wise or a connector or something like that, you know, I'm going to rely pretty much on a lot of the equipment I've used all the time. They've made some great, you know, progress in the quality of plugins and just onboard, you know, digital equalization and digital dynamics and things of that nature. You know, I mean, look at the microphone in front of you, and your voice sounds great, Kelly. I mean, you're probably the best sounding guy on the internet right now. And I'm assuming you're processing that probably through an analog device, right?
Well, yeah, I can't disclose exact signal path because, you know, I'm trying to keep my job right now in this downturn.
Exactly. So point in case is you could have done everything digitally at that point. You know, we all have our favorites and everything that we use. So there definitely is integration between old and new, by the way it sounds, by the way it acts, the way it reacts. And also just because, you know, Dave and Scott and I have worked with these products for so many years, again, muscle memory and just things that we have experienced over the years, we know what works and we know what doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the opportunity that we have now with these systems where you can use so many different plugins is really it's helped us because you can, especially on the price point, you can get all these plugins for, you know, what, a tenth of what an external box would cost, possibly, if not less. The one thing that concerns me about it, and sometimes the reason I'm reluctant to use some plugins, is because I've always liked the idea of the external box to where I could actually reach up and grab a knob and do a tweak and not have to go to a GUI and find that page and find a cursor and make the adjustment. So in a live setting, I still like the idea of that outboard box where I can just reach over and grab. But at the same time, especially, you know, like we use the wave system for up mix, down mix, monitor, stereo, etc. And they offer, you know, a huge variety of plugins. You can also use, you know, noise suppression, etc., compressors, limiters, which is a valuable tool. But sometimes that external analog box is nice to have.
How do you feel about by processing everything through one box through your waves? I'm assuming you're using a digigrid or something like that. How do you feel about it being a single point of failure? So you've got all of these plugins, you're running up mixers, down mixers, stereo synthesizers, compressors, limiters, all of that out of one box. Doesn't it kind of frighten you a little bit to have one point of failure and all of that stuff goes away versus having and I know everything has a point of failure, even if it's an analog external box, but if I lose one piece of gear, I don't lose it all. What are your thoughts on that?
Scares me to death, actually. But so
we
what
appreciate
we do,
truth here. That's awesome.
but what we do on the Monday Night Football trucks, we have two redundant systems running simultaneously.
Gotcha.
So on the desktop, I can go from input 1 to input 2 wherever I need to, and go to the backup system.
Perfect.
Yeah, Dave, why don't you weigh in here?
I guess I'm a little more adventurous. I think I've taken that leap of faith in using some of this external stuff. Now, granted, yes, I agree that you have to have a fail-safe, and typically it's one button push, and I'm back to where I need to be in terms of either an insert or an input. But from some of the experimenting that I've done, and I have to thank CBS management, that on a number of events, we created this CBS Labs where all I got to do for a week is experiment of trying different microphones, different processors, different devices, doing Dolby Atmos. They've been very fortunate in giving me that opportunity, and that's where some of these practices have come from. And myself, and along with another fabulous A2, Dave Bjornson, we've come up with some really cool practices in terms of using plugins and external hardware. The thing that's neat about it is the fact that the CalRecs that almost all of us use in these trucks are clean. They have pristine preamps, but everything sounds the same. And I'll use the analogy, when you're recording an orchestra, you don't use the same microphone to record every instrument. They're very unique. And I use the term color. And so what I'm trying to do is color the sound. And by using outboard gear, such as these old Neve preamps, API preamps, they have iron transformers. That's where the magic is, in the iron. And when you A/B something, it's incredible. I mean, just running through a transformer, it adds life, it adds color. And people at CBS have noticed it and have really embraced a lot of us in the 500 series format of using different preamps and compressors and the like to color the sound, if you will, and you can hear it. And so with the technology being what it is in recent years with the advancement of DSP processing and Shark chips, that you can do stuff in real time and no latency. Before, I couldn't use a Neve preamp and a 1076 or 1176 compressor live. You could record it, but the announcer would hear a delay. Now the Shark chips have come down to where you can have a small box with massive amounts of DSP horsepower, and you can now do these signal chains that are tailored specific to the sound source that you're trying to capture. And the great example is announcers. When all of us have multiple announcers, each one of them are unique in their own way. They all sound the same. And I have tried to think outside the box and not use the same microphone and process to capture all that. And using the outboard gear and the plugins have been a really welcomed addition. And of course, there's little templates you have and things like, you know, we all have used noise reduction, you know, Cedar, for example, whether it's an old style version or the DNS8. Well, there's some great plugins that you can do real time that have so much more control that's more specific to what you're trying to remove. For example, I've used a lot of de-reverb plugins. When you're in a hallway that's cinder block, tile floor, trying to do a two-way interview, sounds horrible. You do it live, well, I can run that microphone through a de-reverb plugin and take all that away in almost real time. So yeah, I've embraced that new technology, and I use the word color, and that a few of my colleagues at CBS, we've embraced it to kind of take what was cherished in the 70s, if you will, and bring it back to what we are doing now.
And I think that that's a perfect segue into kind of just capping off what our conversation was really about. Creating a mix that's both engaging, not abandoning what got us here. We recognize the people that got us here. We recognize the technology that got us here. And all of it still plays in today's market, no matter what you're doing. We are in a very fortunate moment in time. It feels very unfortunate right now, but I think we will look back and we'll go, you know what? Here was that step change that we're waiting to do. Those of you looking to come in and fill in, you know, behind Fred, behind Scott and Dave, that opportunity is going to emerge. You will have to think differently though. So embracing that, we're going to answer whatever questions we can. We're going to share those with the team that was on the screen here, and whatever answers we didn't get to, we'll get those typed in. I did put in the Crash website for the Vista training. I had a couple questions around that. So thank you, gentlemen. Thanks so much. Fred, please give us our apologies to your next appointment for holding you over.
Thanks for having me.
Scott, Michael, thank you for pulling together this unbelievable panel of really capable folks. There's our emails up there, guys. Thanks for sharing knowledge, and see if you can help me out with getting that open house thing going, because selfishly, I'd love to get up to what used to be Trio Video on one of my off days when I'm not on the air, and get a few things learned. So thanks again. Everybody have a great day, and join us this afternoon for our A2 panel with a lot of the same names that you heard brought up here. We're going to be talking to them about their bosses. So I think it should be pretty good. Yeah, exactly. So everybody have a great afternoon, and we'll meet up with you at 4 p.m. on the A2 webinar. Go to practicalshowtech.com to register. And thanks, Michael, and I'll see you here in just a couple hours.
You
Thanks,
got it,
Fred.
Keller.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
See you
So
guys.
Good
long.
luck, everybody.
All
Good to see
right.
you guys.
Bye.